The sterile, acrid scent of the operating room, antiseptic, metallic, final, clawed at Elara Vance's throat. A suffocating premonition. But it wasn't the looming threat of the emergency C-section, the hurried preparations, or the two bright lights that truly stole her breath. No, it was the echoing silence from her husband, Julian Thorne. Each unanswered call, each unread message, hammered another nail into the coffin of her hope. Where was he? This was it? The moment they'd planned for, dreamed of, even argued over nursery colors for. Now? Now she was a solitary figure on a cold table, the vastness of her fear, a universe expanding within her. She'd pictured it so differently, hadn't she? Julian, his hand warm and steady in hers, his usually cool gray eyes softened with an uncharacteristic warmth, maybe even a tear or two. Their moment. Instead, a cold sweat slicked her skin beneath the thin hospital gown, each bead a tiny, frozen tear for the dream unraveling with every passing second. Somewhere across Port City, Julian was… what? Stuck in traffic? A laugh, raw and broken, almost escaped her. He was never stuck in traffic. Julian Thorne orchestrated his life and everyone in it with chilling precision. Mrs. Vance, Elara. Dr. Evelyn Reed's voice, a calm, steady anchor in the rising tide of panic, sliced through the fog. We need to proceed. Now. Your baby's heart rate is dropping. Elara could only nod. A jerky, puppet-like movement. The words lodged in her throat, a painful, jagged stone. Her baby. Leo. Their son. Her hand, trembling uncontrollably, fumbled for her phone again. 10 missed calls, 12 texts. The screen remained stubbornly blank, a mirror reflecting her desolation. He'll be here, she'd whispered to the bustling nurses, to the impassive gleam of surgical steel, to the hollow ache in her own heart. A desperate lie, fragile as spun glass. Dr. Reed's gaze met hers, a brief, knowing glance filled with an understanding Elara wasn't yet ready to face. Not yet. The world tilted, the anesthesiologist's voice a distant murmur. A cold, spreading numbness that crept up her body, a chilling tide claiming her. And as it did, her mind, untethered, drifted back. Just that morning, Julian, standing before their bedroom's antique cheval mirror, a monument to his own reflection. Meticulously styling his dark hair, the expensive fabric of his tailored suit falling just so. He'd barely glanced at her, at the swell of her belly that housed their son. Just a regular business dinner, darling, he'd said, his voice smooth, almost bored. Don't wait up. The casual dismissal, a tiny, sharp icicle to the heart. How had she not seen it then? The chasm already yawning between them, a sharp, searing pain. The first incision. And in that exact, surreal moment, her phone, resting on the small trolley beside her, buzzed. A jolt, pure adrenaline shot through her. Julian? But no. The screen lit up with a notification from a local Port City news blog, one of those glossy, gossip-filled sites. Her vision swam, the letters blurring. Port City Titan Julian Thorne spotted at the Gilded Spoon's grand opening. And then the image, a thumbnail, small but devastatingly clear. Julian, immaculate in his suit, a champagne flute in hand, a confident smirk playing on his lips, and across the candlelit table from him, a woman. A cascade of platinum blonde hair, a glittering dress, a predatory smile. The operating room plunged into an icy abyss. Her blood pressure, a frantic, trapped bird, beat against her ribs. 115/80, then 120/85. Higher, a nurse's urgent call. Elara, deep breaths for me. Focus on my voice. Dr. Reed, firm, gentle, a lifeline. Your baby needs you to stay calm. Calm? How could she be calm? 6 years of marriage, 2 agonizing years of trying for this baby. Countless whispered promises under velvet skies, dreams woven into the fabric of their shared future. All of it, everything, unraveling in this single brutal moment, illuminated by the harsh, unforgiving glare of hospital lights. This was not just abandonment. This was a calculated, cruel betrayal. The sheer audacity of it. The timing. Could he have planned it this way? A final, devastating flourish. I can see the baby, Elara. Dr. Reed's voice, pulling her back from the precipice. Skilled hands, practiced precision. Just a little more. The next few minutes were a blur. Metallic clinks, muffled voices, and then a sound that should have been pure joy, the most beautiful sound in the world. A cry. It's a boy, Dr. Reed declared, her voice tinged with a warmth that couldn't quite reach Elara. A beautiful baby boy. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The cry. It was too weak, too fragile. A kitten's mew, not a lion's roar. NICU team, stand by. Dr. Reed's tone sharpened, urgency replacing warmth. He's showing signs of respiratory distress. A fleeting glimpse, tiny, perfect, and terrifyingly deathly pale. Then he was gone, whisked away to another part of the room, a flurry of green scrubs obscuring him from her sight. Leo, her son, fighting for breath from his very first moment, and she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The empty chair beside her bed, where Julian should have been, screamed his absence. The truth, a monster she'd kept chained in the deepest dungeons of her mind for months, broke free, roaring its hideous victory. Her vision tunneled. The edges of the world frayed, dimming into a suffocating gray. The last thing she saw, the very last image before consciousness mercifully slipped away, was Dr. Evelyn Reed's face. Those cool, intelligent blue eyes now filled with a fierce, almost maternal determination. And in that fleeting second, as the blackness enveloped her, a strange, disjointed thought surfaced. Sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you've pinned all your hopes on for years. Sometimes they are the strangers who step forward when everyone else, everyone you trusted, steps so callously back. Her fingers, though she wasn't aware of it, tightened around the small, antique locket she always wore. A cool, familiar weight against her clammy skin. A relic from a past she barely remembered, its secrets locked within. Leo's faint, struggling cry echoed in the encroaching darkness. A tiny, desperate sound, carrying with it a question that would claw at her, haunting her waking moments and her tormented dreams. How do you rebuild a life that's shattered into a million irreparable pieces in the very instant it was supposed to become gloriously, breathtakingly complete? Waking was a slow, painful crawl back to a reality Elara Vance desperately wished was just a nightmare's lingering shadow. The first assault on her senses was the rhythmic, insistent beeping of monitors, a sound that would soon become the soundtrack to her fractured existence. Her eyelids felt like lead weights, each blink an agonizing effort. Her mouth was parched, a desert of cotton and stale fear. And then the pain. Oh God, the pain. A searing fire low in her belly, a brutal reminder of the C-section, of the life torn from her. Leo? The name was a ghost of a whisper, barely audible even to herself. Her hands, acting on pure primal instinct, fluttered to her stomach, expecting the familiar, comforting swell. Instead, they met only bandages, emptiness, and a fresh wave of that tearing pain. He's in the NICU. Dr. Evelyn Reed's voice, calm and impossibly steady, materialized from somewhere nearby, a life raft in the churning sea of Elara's confusion. He's fighting hard, Elara. Just like his mother. Just like his mother? Was she fighting? Or was she drowning? The private hospital room swam slowly into focus. Afternoon sunlight, muted and apologetic, filtered through the half-drawn blinds, painting long, melancholic shadows across the opulent space. This room. It should have been a haven of joy, overflowing with flowers, pastel balloons bobbing merrily, the quiet, contented gurgles of a newborn. Julian by her side, his eyes finally truly alight with something other than self-interest. Instead, the air was thick with the sterile, cloying smell of disinfectant and an overwhelming, crushing weight of absence. An absence that had a name, Julian Thorne. Her head turned on the crisp pillow, a slow, creaking movement. Hope, that stubborn, foolish weed, still pushed through the cracks in her shattered heart. She scanned the room, half expecting, praying, to find Julian slumped in the plush visitor's chair, his expensive suit creased from an overnight vigil, his usually perfect hair disheveled with worry. But the chair sat empty, stark, its pristine leather surface unmarred by either concern or contrition. Of course it was. Why had she even looked? My husband. The words scraped her raw throat. Had anyone even tried to reach him? Did he even know his son had been born? Or was he still dining? Dr. Reed's expression, usually so open and reassuring, flickered almost imperceptibly, a tiny tightening around her kind eyes. We've been trying to reach Mr. Thorne, Elara. His office, they said he's in an important meeting. An important meeting. The phrase echoed in the sterile silence, a cruel, mocking counterpoint to the image seared into Elara's mind. Julian, champagne flute raised, candlelight glinting off the diamonds of the woman across from him. His practiced, charming smile. Bile rose in Elara's throat. An important meeting? More important than his wife? More important than the birth of his son? The son he'd claimed to want so desperately? Her fingers, thin and pale, twisted the cheap hospital blanket until her knuckles shone white. The fury, cold and sharp, was a welcome change from the suffocating despair. "I need to see my baby," she said, the words emerging with a newfound, brittle strength. She tried to sit up, to swing her legs over the side of the bed, but the movement sent a jolt of agony through her abdomen, ripping a gasp from her lips. "Easy, Elara." Dr. Reed was there in an instant, her hand gentle but firm on Elara's shoulder, easing her back down, adjusting the bed's position. "Leo needs you strong. Let me get a wheelchair. You're in no condition to walk that far yet." The journey to the NICU, even in a wheelchair pushed by the capable Dr. Reed, felt like crossing a vast, unforgiving ocean. Every slight bump in the polished hospital corridor sent waves of nauseating pain through Elara's battered body, but she barely registered it. Her entire world, her entire being, had narrowed to a single, burning pinpoint of purpose, reaching her son. Leo. The NICU was another universe entirely. A hushed, dimly lit world of soft, rhythmic hums from life-sustaining machines, the gentle squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum, and an almost palpable aura of whispered prayers and fragile hope. It smelled different, too, a strange, sweetish, medicinal scent. Dr. Reed wheeled her to a gleaming incubator, a clear plastic box that looked more like a futuristic display case than a cradle, and inside, impossibly small, impossibly fragile, lay Leo. "Oh, Leo," Elara breathed, the sound a soft exhalation of pain and overwhelming love. Her hand pressed against the cool, unyielding plastic barrier, a desperate longing to touch him, to hold him, thrumming through her. He was so little, so terrifyingly still. Tubes and wires like a macabre technological web snaked around his tiny form, tethering him to the beeping, blinking machines that kept him alive. His chest, no bigger than a small bird's, rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. His skin, translucent and delicate, still carried a faint, bluish tinge. Just over 4 pounds, Dr. Reed had said. A tiny fighter in a world clearly built for giants. What chance did he really have? Could strength alone conquer this? "Would you like to touch him?" A kind-faced nurse, her name tag reading Hannah, materialized beside them, her voice a soft murmur. She was already preparing to open one of the incubator's small portholes. Skin-to-skin contact can work miracles, you know. Elara could only nod, tears blurring her vision, a fresh wave of emotion choking her. Miracles. Yes, they would need a miracle. As she slipped her trembling hand through the opening, the warmth inside the incubator enveloped her fingers. And then contact. Leo's skin, impossibly soft, like warm silk beneath her fingertips. His tiny hand, no bigger than her thumbnail, twitched. Then, miraculously, his minute fingers curled, attempting to grasp hers. "Hi, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks, hot and cleansing. "Hi, my sweet Leo. Mommy's here. Mommy's not going anywhere. I promise." The fragile, sacred moment shattered. Her phone, which Dr. Reed had retrieved from the operating room and kept safe in her pocket, buzzed. The doctor hesitated for a fraction of a second before handing it over, a shadow of concern in her eyes. It wasn't Julian. Of course it wasn't. Instead, an email notification blazed across the screen. The subject line hit Elara like a physical blow. "Payment declined. Hospital insurance claim. Policy terminated." Her hands began to shake violently. Terminated? What did that mean? With trembling fingers, she opened the message. Their family insurance policy. The comprehensive, top-tier plan Julian had always boasted about. The one he'd assured her would cover every possible eventuality, every conceivable cost, had been cancelled 3 weeks ago without a word to her. "Elara, is everything okay?" Dr. Reed asked softly, her gaze sharp with concern, noting the blood draining from Elara's face. I don't." Elara stared at the phone, her mind refusing to process the words. And then, like a cruel, relentless tide, more notifications began to flood in. Their joint Premier credit card, cancelled. Their shared checking account, the one holding what she thought was a substantial cushion. Account balance, dollars, emptied. Systematically, clinically. Their life together, their future, apparently worth less than the cost of a premature birth. Less than a dinner at the Gilded Spoon. The sterile, quiet world of the NICU began to spin, the soft beeps of the monitors warping into a dizzying, discordant cacophony. Julian hadn't just abandoned her. He had systematically, meticulously destroyed their financial safety net, leaving her utterly exposed, vulnerable, and facing a mountain of debt she couldn't possibly imagine paying. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated, cold-blooded annihilation. Had he been planning this for weeks? Months? While she'd been blissfully unaware, picking out names and dreaming of their future. Had he been plotting her ruin? The man she'd married? The man she'd loved, or thought she'd loved? Who was he? She vaguely felt Dr. Reed's firm, reassuring grip on her shoulder, heard Nurse Hannah's concerned voice calling for assistance. But all Elara could focus on, through the gathering darkness threatening to engulf her, was Leo's tiny hand, still reaching out from the incubator, his fingers grasping at the empty air. A tiny, desperate plea. What do I do? The words escaped her lips, less a question, more a prayer to a deaf heaven. What do I do now? How could one man inflict so much pain, so much devastation, with such apparent ease? She remembered him once, in a rare moment of casual conversation, mentioning his prized black orchid collection in the climate-controlled conservatory of their penthouse. He'd spoken of their delicate beauty, their rarity, the precise conditions they required to thrive. He'd nurtured them, controlled their environment with obsessive care. Was Leo, just another possession to be cultivated or discarded at his whim? Dr. Reed knelt beside the wheelchair, her usually professional demeanor softening with an unexpected tenderness. Right now, Elara, she said, her voice a firm, steady anchor. You focus on breathing. You focus on Leo. Everything else, she paused, choosing her words with a surgeon's care, everything else we'll figure out, together. And as if in response, as if Leo himself had heard and understood, the monitors tracking his fragile vitals beeped a steady, hopeful rhythm. His oxygen levels, the nurse murmured with a small smile, were rising, just slightly. His tiny heart, a warrior's drum, beat a little stronger. In that precise moment, watching her son, her impossibly small son, fight for every single breath against such overwhelming odds, Elara felt something shift deep within her, something harder than hope, something sharper than the fear that had gnawed at her for days. It was a cold, diamond-hard spark of determination, a nascent resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Julian Thorne thought he had left her with nothing. He thought he had broken her. He was wrong. She had Leo. She had her own strength, buried deep but now stirring. And maybe, just maybe, she had found an unexpected, unwavering ally in the doctor who refused to look away from her pain, who offered a hand when the world had tried to drag her under. But as the sun dipped below the port city skyline, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and despairing gold, casting long, ominous shadows across the sterile floor of the NICU, a chilling question remained, a cold knot in her stomach. Would it be enough? Could this fragile new strength, this tentative alliance, possibly withstand the coming storm of hospital bills, of Julian's calculated cruelty, before it all came crashing down, crushing them both? Silence in their once shared penthouse apartment, a sprawling testament to Julian Thorne's ambition and Elara Vance's former naivety, felt heavier, more oppressive than any sound. Each meticulously chosen designer object, the cold marble sculptures, the abstract paintings that spoke of wealth but not warmth, the silk drapes that whispered of secrets, now stood as a monument to a life that felt like an elaborate, cruel lie. A gilded cage, she realized with a sickening lurch, and she'd been its too willing, too trusting songbird. How could she have been so blind for so long? Was love truly that effective a blinder? Or was it simply that Julian was that masterful a manipulator? Dr. Evelyn Reed, her presence a quiet balm against Elara's raw, exposed nerves, had insisted on driving her home from the hospital for a few hours. You need clothes, Elara, and you need to face this space, on your terms as much as possible. Dr. Reed, ever practical, ever kind. But how could any of this be on her terms? Julian had stripped her of all agency, hadn't he? The doorman, usually so obsequious to Mrs. Thorne, offered a look that mingled pity with a new, uncomfortable deference. News traveled fast in these rarefied circles. Or perhaps Julian had already issued new decrees. Elara wouldn't be surprised. Inside, the air was stale, chilled. Julian's expensive wool coat was still draped carelessly over a designer chair in the vast living room, an arrogant statement of his casual possession. Pregnancy books, once filled with her hopeful highlighting, lay stacked neatly on the glass coffee table, now looking like relics from a forgotten civilization. The nursery door, painted a soft, dreamy blue she'd agonized over for weeks, was closed, just as she'd left it. But now, each familiar object felt like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. Markers of a life that had vanished in the space of a single shattering heartbeat. She stood in the grand entrance hall, still wearing the loose, shapeless clothes the hospital had provided, her surgical incision a dull, throbbing ache beneath the bandages. Her body felt alien, violated, emptied. "I can stay for a bit," Dr. Reed offered, her voice gentle, her medical bag still in hand. "Help you get settled. Make some tea?" "I'm fine," Elara answered automatically, the words hollow, devoid of meaning even to her own ears. Fine? She'd been saying it so often lately, to the nurses who prodded and poked, to the sympathetic glances from strangers, to her own haunted reflection in the mirror. The word had lost all connection to reality. The truth was a shard of glass lodged in her throat, too painful to swallow, too jagged to speak. She hadn't been fine since those first devastating emails had lit up her phone in the NICU. And speaking of devastation, the mail. Piled neatly on the polished mahogany console by the door, amongst the glossy catalogs and invitations to charity galas she would no longer attend, were two official-looking envelopes. Her hands, still annoyingly shaky, fumbled with the first. Port City General Hospital. The bill. Her breath hitched. $23,000 for the emergency C-section. Her eyes scanned down. And another, itemized bill for Leo's NICU care. $47,000, and counting. The numbers swam before her eyes, a dizzying, terrifying vortex of debt. All of it now her sole responsibility, thanks to Julian's meticulously planned insurance cancellation. A fresh wave of nausea roiled in her stomach. How could anyone be so monstrous? Her phone. She checked it for the 100th time that day. Still no messages from Julian Thorne. His social media, usually a carefully curated stream of his triumphs and acquisitions, had gone dark. His office, when Dr. Reed had tried again that morning, still parroted the same infuriating line. "Mr. Thorne is in vital meetings and cannot be disturbed." Vital. Yes, vital to his continued evasion of responsibility, no doubt. The only trace of him, the only proof he still walked this earth, was that single damning credit card charge from 3 nights ago. Dinner for 2 at the Gilded Spoon. While his son fought for his life. "Elara, you need to at least sit down." Dr. Reed's voice, firmer now, cut through her spiraling panic. She gently steered Elara towards the living room couch, a monstrous cream-colored affair that had cost more than Elara's first car. Elara sank into its unforgiving cushions, wincing as pain shot through her abdomen. Her eyes, against her will, drifted to the gallery wall of framed photographs. Her and Julian on their wedding day. His arm possessively around her waist, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke, his eyes, even then, holding a glint of something she now recognized as calculation. Had he been planning this even then? Crafting this perfect life, this perfect wife, only to detonate it all when it became inconvenient? When the reality of fatherhood threatened to impinge on his perfectly ordered world? The sound of running water startled her. Dr. Reed had disappeared into the cavernous kitchen, returning moments later with a glass of water and 2 pills. "Your pain medication," she explained, holding them out. "And before you say you're fine again, you're not. Nobody would be in your situation." Elara accepted the pills, the fight suddenly draining out of her, leaving her feeling boneless and utterly exhausted. The facade was too heavy to maintain. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," she whispered, the words raw, tasting of ash and unshed tears. "That this is all just some horrible, twisted dream. That I'll open my eyes and he'll be there, and Leo will be healthy and home with us." Her voice cracked, the sound pitiful even to her own ears. Dr. Reed sat beside her, not too close, not too far. A silent, supportive presence. The silence between them was different from the suffocating emptiness that filled the rest of the penthouse. Less accusatory, more patient, understanding. "When's the last time you ate something, Elara?" Dr. Reed asked gently after a while. Elara tried to remember. Hospital jello, translucent and tasteless. Half a cardboard sandwich. The days had blurred into a relentless haze of NICU visits, whispered anxieties, and the ever-mounting panic of her financial ruin. A sharp, insistent knock at the front door made her jump, sending another stab of pain through her tender abdomen. Through the frosted glass panel of the enormous door she could see a man's silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, her heart leaped, a wild, irrational surge of, what? Hope? Fear? Julian? But no, the shape was wrong, thicker, less elegant. Dr. Reed was already moving, her expression instantly alert, positioning herself subtly between Elara and the door. "Are you expecting anyone?" No, Elara struggled to stand, her legs feeling like water. Another knock, louder this time, more impatient. Mrs. Thorne? A male voice called out, officious and impersonal. This is a Mr. Davies from Port City Central Bank. I need to speak with you regarding your property status. Property status? The words hit her like physical blows, each one a fresh nail in her coffin. What else had Julian taken? What else was there left to lose? Was this it? The eviction? Already? I'll handle this, Dr. Reed said, her voice suddenly imbued with the same calm, authoritative tone Elara had heard her use in the operating room, the voice of someone unequivocally in charge. She turned to Elara. You're in no condition for unexpected visitors. Doctor's orders. Elara watched, oddly detached, as Dr. Reed opened the door, just a crack, enough to speak with the banker. Their voices were low, hushed, but phrases drifted through the tense air. Recent major surgery. Medical recovery period. Legal representatives will be in contact. Potential harassment charges. Harassment? Yes, that's exactly what this felt like. When the door finally closed, the sound of Mr. Davies's retreating footsteps echoing down the marble hallway, Elara realized she was shaking. Not from fear this time, not entirely, but from something deeper, something primal. A cold, hard rage. Or maybe it was grief, so profound it felt like fury. Or perhaps the two had become so inextricably tangled, they'd morphed into something new, something dangerous. He's going to take everything, she said, the words flat, lifeless, tasting like ash in her mouth. The apartment, the car, I'm not even sure which car is technically mine anymore. The savings I had before we married. Her hand instinctively went to her C-section scar, a constant throbbing reminder. All while our son, our tiny son, fights for his life in the NICU. Dr. Reed's expression, usually so compassionate, hardened. A glint of steel entered her blue eyes. No, she said, her voice firm, unequivocal. He's not. Elara stared at her. How can you possibly know that? You saw the bills, you heard the bank. Because, Dr. Reed said, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips as she pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. My Sir Serafina is one of the very best and frankly most feared family law attorneys in Port City. And as it happens, she looked up, her smile widening slightly. She owes me a rather significant favor. Just then, outside the panoramic windows that overlooked the glittering, indifferent skyline of Port City, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the darkening sky. A storm was brewing, both outside and within. But for the first time since waking up alone and terrified in that sterile operating room, Elara Vance felt something other than the crushing weight of fear and despair. It was a tiny, fragile seedling, but it was there. Hope? No, not yet. Something else. Something sharper. She felt ready for war. Later that week, in a sleek, minimalist office that screamed competence and expensive retainers, Elara found herself facing Serafina Reed. If Evelyn was calm water, Serafina was a controlled wildfire. Sharp, intense, with eyes that missed nothing and a mind that seemed to operate at lightning speed. She wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, and her blonde hair, a shade lighter than her sister's, was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail. Jessica? Dr. Reed? Serafina corrected herself with a slight, impatient gesture. Told me the basics. But I need to hear it from you, Mrs. Vance. Everything. Every detail. Every date. Every dollar. Leave absolutely nothing out. The devil, as they say, is in the details, and Julian Thorne sounds like he's got a legion of them. So? Elara told her. The story spilled out, the canceled insurance, the emptied accounts, the news of the property status investigation. She even recounted, her voice trembling, finding property records online the previous night, painstakingly searching while Leo slept fitfully in the NICU, showing their magnificent penthouse had been transferred solely into Julian's name months ago. He was planning this, she whispered, the fresh wave of realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. All those months, while I was picking out nursery colors, planning our future, he was erasing me. Erasing us. Serafina's pen moved steadily across a thick legal pad, her expression unreadable. And the woman at the gilded spoon? Do we have a name? Clara. Clara Monroe, Elara said, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. She's some kind of social media influencer. I found her profile. Luxury lifestyles, exclusive events. There are photos of her at parties going back months. Julian is in some of them, in the background, always watching her. Had he been grooming his next victim even as their own life together was supposedly reaching its joyful pinnacle? The thought was almost too much to bear. Good, Serafina said, a sharp, predatory gleam in her eyes that surprised Elara. A digital footprint. We can use that. Extensively. She set down her pen. Now, Mrs. Vance, let's talk strategy. Let's talk about how we fight a man like Julian Thorne. The next hour was a dizzying crash course in legal warfare. Terms like emergency spousal support, fraudulent conveyance, discovery requests, and prenuptial clause violations flew across the polished desk. Serafina laid out a multi-pronged battle plan with the precision of a seasoned general, each word a weapon being sharpened for the fight ahead. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But for the first time, Elara didn't feel quite so alone in the face of Julian's treachery. But the hospital bills. Elara interrupted, her voice cracking despite her resolve. The sheer magnitude of the figures Serafina was quoting for legal fees on top of the medical debt threatened to suffocate her. They're due. Leo's NICU costs, I have nothing. Already handled, Serafina said flatly, not missing a beat. At least the immediate crisis. Evelyn took care of the initial retainers and made arrangements with the hospital for a payment plan, citing extreme duress. Elara froze. What? Evelyn, Dr. Reed did that? Serafina's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flicker of warmth, of fierce sisterly pride. My sister, she said, a rare softness in her voice, has a substantial trust fund she barely touches. Says money meant for happiness should be used for exactly that, especially when it comes to righting a terrible wrong. She shuffled her papers, all business again. Consider it a loan, if your pride insists, Mrs. Vance. But for now, it's done. You need to focus on Leo, and on this fight. The harsh fluorescent lights of Serafina's office suddenly seemed too bright. Elara pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by a kindness so profound, so unexpected, she could barely comprehend it. After Julian's calculated cruelty, this selfless generosity felt like a lifeline from another world. Why? She managed, her voice thick with unshed tears. Why are you both? Why are you helping me like this? You barely know me. Serafina was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the intricate cityscape visible through her panoramic window. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, freighted with a pain that mirrored Elara's own. 3 years ago, she said, her eyes distant, Evelyn lost a baby, a little girl, 7th month of pregnancy, stillborn. Elara gasped, her own heart aching in sympathy. Her husband at the time, he couldn't handle it, walked away, left Evelyn to face the grief, the funeral, the empty nursery, all of it, completely alone. Serafina's gaze returned to Elara, her eyes now hard as flint. I handled his divorce. Let's just say, a grim, humorless smile touched her lips. He came to regret his choices, profoundly. Some men, Mrs. Vance, are cowards wrapped in expensive suits. Julian Thorne strikes me as one of them, and we, Mrs. Vance, are going to make him pay. That night, exhausted but with a sliver of fight rekindled within her, Elara fell into a troubled sleep, and for the first time, she dreamed. She was on a tiny, storm-tossed boat, waves crashing over the bow, the wind screaming in her ears. And in the distance, through the driving rain and the terrifying darkness, a single, unwavering beam of light cut through the tempest. A lighthouse. Strong, steadfast, searching for her, calling her home. As Serafina laid out the grim legal realities and the daunting path ahead, Elara's phone, lying on the cool glass of the conference table, buzzed. A text message. From Nurse Hannah at the NICU. Leo's awake, trying to grab my finger. He's a little fighter, this one. The world outside the sterile confines of Serafina Reed's office, with its talk of lawsuits and financial ruin, suddenly faded into insignificance. Hope, tiny and fierce like her son's improbable grip on a nurse's finger, pulled her forward, a beacon in her own personal storm. 2 weeks. 2 agonizing weeks that felt like 2 years etched onto Elara Vance's soul. Each day was a torturous cycle of fluorescent-lit NICU vigils, whispered prayers for Leo's fragile breaths, and the gnawing dread of what fresh hell Julian Thorne would unleash next. The eviction notice, when it finally arrived, wasn't a surprise. Not really. But the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it still managed to steal the air from her lungs. It came via an expensive overnight courier. The crisp, heavy parchment, a stark, insulting contrast to the flimsy hospital gowns that had become her second skin. 72 hours. Julian's signature, A bold, arrogant slash at the bottom of the page sealed her fate, or so he undoubtedly thought. 72 hours to vacate the life he'd built around her, the gilded cage she'd mistaken for a home. How does one even begin to dismantle a life in 72 hours? Especially a life built on such carefully constructed illusions. Leave the designer things, Elara? Serafina Reed's voice, sharp as a diamond, cut through the haze of Elara's despair. The lawyer stood in the doorway of the enormous walk-in closet, a space larger than some city apartments, her arms crossed, surveying the opulent chaos with a critical eye. Dr. Evelyn Reed was there too, a quieter, more comforting presence, already armed with packing tape and cardboard boxes. An unlikely trio, bound by one man's treachery. Every gown, every jewel, every ridiculously overpriced handbag he bought you becomes evidence. Evidence of lifestyle. Marital assets he's trying to spirit away. We document everything. Elara nodded numbly, her hands hovering over a row of exquisite silk dresses, gowns she'd worn to Julian's glittering corporate events, each one a costume for a role she no longer wanted, nor could play. Each one costing more than a year's salary from the nursing career she'd so willingly abandoned for him. How could she have been so foolish? So easily bought? With a surge of revulsion, she turned away from them. Instead, her fingers sought out the familiar comfort of the worn leather satchel her father had given her for her nursing school graduation. A lifetime ago, it seemed. The soft, hand-knitted cashmere sweater her mother, gone now too many years, had lovingly crafted when Elara first announced with such innocent joy her pregnancy with Leo. A small, battered tin box held a handful of faded family photographs from a simpler time. A time before Julian Thorne had entered her life and painted it in shades of gold and deceit. These were the real pieces of herself, the fragments she needed to reclaim. Buried deep beneath the suffocating layers of the perfect, polished corporate wife Julian had molded her into. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal of the antique locket at her throat. That she would always keep. Found something interesting? Dr. Reed's voice, laced with a curious tension, called from Julian's meticulously organized home office. Elara and Serafina hurried in. Evelyn stood before Julian's vast mahogany desk, holding a thick, unmarked manila envelope. It was hidden in the back of his private filing cabinet, tucked behind his tax returns. With trembling hands, Elara took the envelope. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What fresh horror awaited? Inside, a sheaf of documents. Bank statements from unfamiliar offshore accounts, with dizzying sums of money swirling through them. Property deeds in names she didn't recognize, in places she'd never heard of. And photos. Dozens of them. Glossy, professional-quality photographs. Julian and Clara Monroe, the platinum blonde from the Gilded Spoon, at private resort villas, intimate dinners in secluded restaurants, secret weekend getaways. The timestamps on the photos, meticulously noted, told a story more damning, more calculated than any tearful confession. They dated back months. Months when he'd been professing his undying love to Elara. Months when they'd been trying for Leo. Months when she'd believed, with a blind, foolish faith, in their shared future. These were taken by a private investigator, Dr. Reed observed, her voice tight with a controlled, simmering anger that Elara had never heard from her before. He was documenting his own affair. Why would he do that? Serafina took one of the financial statements, her eyes scanning it with predatory speed. A grim, almost satisfied smile touched her lips. Insurance, perhaps, or leverage? Building a paper trail to protect himself in case of a messy divorce. Painting you, Elara, as the unstable one, perhaps. Or maybe, her smile widened, a truly terrifying sight. He was simply so arrogant, so convinced of his own invincibility that he kept meticulous records of his conquests and his financial deceptions. Some men are like that, narcissists of the highest order. She tapped a finger on a complex flowchart of interconnected shell corporations. Except, the fool just handed us everything we need to not only fight him for your share, but potentially to interest some other, more official parties in his business dealings. What did that mean? Before Elara could ask, the chilling sound of a car door slamming outside, directly in front of the penthouse, made them all freeze. Through the sheer curtains of the office window, Elara caught a glimpse of a familiar, sleek black sedan pulling into the private driveway. Julian's car. Her blood ran cold. A stuttering gasp escaped her. He's not supposed to be here. she whispered, her voice barely audible. His secretary said he was in Metro City until next week, for that big merger. Get your essential documents, Elara. Passport, Leo's birth certificate, the medical records. Serafina's voice was a whip crack, instantly transforming from legal strategist to field commander. She was already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Evelyn, help her. I'll handle Mr. Thorne. Elara moved on autopilot, her limbs feeling heavy, disconnected. Her passport. Leo's tiny birth certificate, his name, Leo Vance Thorne, a cruel irony now. The bulging folder of Leo's NICU medical records. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold them. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not like this. Breathe, Elara. Dr. Reed's steady presence was suddenly beside her, her calm voice a soothing balm on Elara's frayed nerves. Just like we practiced for Leo, in through your nose, out through your mouth, slow and steady, focus on what needs to be done. Right now. The jangle of keys in the front door lock, loud, imperious, and then his voice, Julian's voice, smooth as silk, cold as ice, controlled, always so damn controlled. Elara, Angel, are you here? We need to talk. The sound of his voice, so familiar, so intimately known, yet now so utterly false, so steeped in betrayal, sparked something unexpected in Elara's chest. Not fear this time. Not even the searing pain of her shattered heart. Something harder, something brighter. Something that felt like a core of molten steel being forged in the fires of her agony. An incredible, almost terrifying clarity. Take these to the car, Evelyn, she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she handed the precious documents to Dr. Reed. And Serafina, please, just give me 1 minute with him, alone. Elara, I don't think that's wise. Serafina began, her eyes narrowed with concern. Please, Elara insisted, a newfound strength resonating in her tone. 1 minute, I need this. The two sisters exchanged a look, and then Evelyn nodded slowly. 1 minute, Elara, we'll be right outside the door. She walked towards the master suite, the one place in this opulent prison that had, for a fleeting time, felt truly like hers. From beneath the marble vanity, she pulled out a small, velvet-lined blue box she'd hidden there weeks ago, long before the world had imploded. A Father's Day gift. Chosen with such love, such hope, such naive anticipation. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, lay a small, intricately carved silver rattle. Engraved on its polished surface were the tiny, perfect words, "To Daddy, love Leo." Footsteps on the grand staircase. Serafina's sharp, legalistic warnings drifting up. Julian's smooth, dismissive responses. He was always dismissive of women, wasn't he? Unless he wanted something from them. Elara straightened her shoulders, catching her reflection in the enormous gilt-edged mirror. Her post-pregnancy body, still healing, still soft and unfamiliar, looked almost foreign in her simple, borrowed clothes. But her eyes were different, clearer, stronger, stripped bare of illusion. She walked out of the bathroom just as Julian reached the bedroom doorway. Serafina paced behind him, her expression thunderous. He looked exactly the same. The perfectly tailored suit, the carefully styled hair, that infuriatingly practiced, charming smile. But now, for the first time, Elara could see the hollowness behind it all. The emptiness. The chilling void where a heart, a conscience, should have been. Angel, he began, his voice a silken caress, using that old cloying pet name he knew she'd once adored. God, was she ever that foolish? This has all just gotten so terribly out of hand. A misunderstanding. Let's just sit down, talk this through. Elara held up the small blue box. Her hand was perfectly steady. I was going to give this to you on Father's Day, she said, her voice quiet, devoid of tremor, yet carrying a weight that made Julian's smile falter. Just for a fraction of a second. I had this whole moment planned, you know? You'd open it at breakfast, sunlight streaming in, and I'd tell you what an amazing, wonderful father I knew you'd be to our son. Something flickered in Julian Thorne's perfectly controlled gray eyes. Discomfort? Annoyance? Maybe even a fleeting shadow of guilt? Or was that just wishful thinking on her part? His smile, however, never wavered. It was his armor, his weapon. Our son, Elara continued, her voice gathering strength with every word, every syllable a small, hard stone of truth hurled against his wall of deceit, is in the NICU right now, Julian. Fighting for every breath. He weighs 4 pounds, 3 ounces. His favorite nurse's name is Hannah, and she says he has my stubborn chin. He holds her finger when she changes his tubes. He is, without a doubt, the strongest, bravest person I have ever met. She placed the blue box gently on the polished surface of the antique dresser that stood between them. A chasm. And he is never, ever going to need this. Not from you. Julian opened his mouth to speak, his expression shifting from practiced charm to a flash of his more familiar impatience. But Elara cut him off, her voice now ringing with the cold, clear strength of tempered steel. You can have the house, Julian. You can have the designer clothes, the expensive cars, the glittering, empty life you built to trap me in. You can have it all. She met his gaze directly, unflinchingly. But Leo will only know love that's real. He will know strength. He will know integrity. He will know everything you are not. Without waiting for his response, without a single backward glance, Elara Vance turned and walked away. Past Seraphina's small, almost imperceptible nod of approval, past Dr. Evelyn Reed's proud, encouraging smile, down the sweeping marble staircase of the house that was no longer hers, and out the massive front door into the bright, unforgiving afternoon sun. Behind her, she heard Julian calling her name, his voice no longer smooth but sharp, edged with a surprised fury. But it held no power over her anymore, none at all. She had something stronger now. The undeniable truth of who she was, stripped bare of his influence, and the absolute, unwavering certainty of who she needed to become. For Leo, for herself, for the woman who was finally, irrevocably, awaiting from a long gilded dream into a harder but infinitely brighter reality. As she stepped out of the shadows of Julian Thorne's world, a strange, almost exhilarating sense of liberation settled over her, even as the fear of the unknown gnawed at the edges of her resolve. The black orchids in Julian's conservatory, she somehow knew, would already be starting to droop, their perfect, unnatural beauty beginning to fade, untended, in the sudden absence of their master's controlling hand. The studio apartment, tucked away on a grimy, forgotten street in a less fashionable part of Port City, was a universe removed from the opulent penthouse that had once been her prison. It was small, undeniably shabby, with a persistent scent of damp and a view of a graffiti-scarred brick wall. Yet, as Elara Vance slowly unpacked the few cardboard boxes that contained the salvaged remnants of her former life, her father's worn leather satchel, her mother's hand-knitted sweater, the small tin of faded photographs, and of course, the ever-present antique locket around her neck, an unexpected emotion had begun to bloom in the barren landscape of her heart. A fragile, tentative sense of relief. This tiny space, with its mismatched second-hand furniture and peeling paint, was hers, truly hers. No echoes of Julian Thorne's controlling presence, no lingering scent of his expensive cologne, no invisible bars on this cage. It wasn't much, but in its stark simplicity, it was everything. Days bled into a new exhausting rhythm. Hushed visits to the NICU to sit by Leo's incubator, her fingers pressed against the plastic, whispering promises and stories to her tiny fighting son. Endless, bewildering phone calls with Seraphina Reed, trying to make sense of legal jargon and Julian's labyrinthine betrayals, and the long, lonely nights in the unfamiliar quiet of her small apartment. The city's distant hum, a poor substitute for the steady beat of Leo's monitor that she longed to have beside her. She'd even started looking for work, any work, her nursing license still pending renewal, the mounting bills a constant, terrifying specter. It was on one such bleak morning, a few weeks after her dramatic exit from Julian's life, that the sleek obsidian black sedan, so out of place on this downtrodden street, slid to a silent halt outside her crumbling apartment building. Elara, on her way out for another bus ride to the hospital, froze, her heart plummeting into her worn-out sneakers. Julian. He'd found her. The brief respite was over. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. But the figure that emerged from the car's tinted depths wasn't Julian Thorne. It was a woman. Tall, slender, impeccably dressed in clothes that screamed money and privilege, even from this distance. Her platinum blonde hair, so striking in the news alert image, was now pulled back severely, and as she stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, she looked smaller, diminished, and unmistakably uncertain. Clara Monroe, Julian's mistress. What in God's name was she doing here? Clara clutched a thick manila envelope to her chest, as if it were a shield, her expensive heels picking unsteadily across the uneven pavement. She looked up at Elara's window, her expression a strange mixture of fear and a desperate, hunted resolve. Elara's first instinct was to slam the door, to retreat into the relative safety of her anonymity. What could this woman possibly want from her? More pain? More humiliation? Had Julian sent her as some sort of new, twisted torment? But as Clara drew closer, Elara saw the faint, telltale smudges of exhaustion beneath the woman's perfectly applied makeup, the slight tremor in her perfectly manicured hands. And in her wide green eyes, Elara recognized a flicker of the same raw, abject fear she herself had lived with for so long. It was a look that transcended rivalry, a silent acknowledgement of shared trauma at the hands of the same man. Clara stopped a few feet away, the envelope held out like a desperate offering. "Mrs. Vance, Elara," she began, her voice a low, shaky whisper, nothing like the silvery, confident laugh Elara had imagined. Julian doesn't know I'm here. He'd kill me if he knew." A dramatic statement, perhaps, but looking at the genuine terror in Clara's eyes, Elara wasn't so sure it was an exaggeration. "But you need to see these." Elara's mind raced. More legal threats? Some kind of trick? Another of Julian's elaborate, cruel games? Yet something in Clara's fragile demeanor, in that shared shadow of fear, made her hesitate. This wasn't the brazen, triumphant mistress from the restaurant. This was someone broken, or on the verge of it. "Copies of what?" Elara asked, her voice carefully neutral, though her heart was hammering. "Everything," Clara whispered, her words tumbling out now in a frantic rush. "The new prenup he made me sign last week. The offshore account transfers he's been making since you left. The plans for his next target." Her voice cracked on the last word. "There's always a next target with Julian, isn't there? Always another woman, another life to meticulously construct and then casually destroy." The world tilted, just a fraction. A new prenup? A new target? Already? The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the man. The depth of his depravity. Was there no end to it? And Clara took a deep, shuddering breath, her free hand instinctively going to her flat stomach. "And yesterday, I found out I'm pregnant." Pregnant. The word hung in the grimy morning air between them, heavy with unspoken implications, a bomb ticking softly. Elara stared at Clara Monroe, this woman who had been the symbol of her deepest betrayal, and felt not hatred, not anymore, but a strange, unwelcome, and utterly bewildering surge of empathy. Was this what it felt like to see your enemy, only to realize they were just another victim in a longer, more horrifying story? For the first time, Clara continued, tears now welling in her haunted green eyes, "I saw the whole story from the other side. Your side. What he did to you. What he's capable of. Oh, God, what have I gotten myself into?" Somewhere above them, a window slammed shut, the sound echoing in the sudden heavy silence. Life, in its messy, ordinary ways, continued around them, oblivious to the earth-shattering revelations unfolding on this forgotten port city sidewalk. "He'll destroy you too, you know," Elara said, the words not unkind, merely a statement of brutal fact. "When he finds out about this, about the baby." Clara's laugh was a hollow, broken sound. "I know. He's already started. That business dinner he was at the night your son was born, he was with her, the new one. Some art gallery owner with impeccable social connections and, more importantly, a hefty trust fund. I was supposed to be at some charity event that night, playing my part. The devoted, adoring fiancé." She held out the manila envelope again, her hand trembling. "But I can't. Not anymore. Not after this." Her gaze drifted to the envelope, then back to Elara, a desperate plea in her eyes. "He thinks he's invincible. He thinks he can just erase people. But he can't erase this. Not this time." Elara looked at the woman before her. The designer clothes, the expensive highlights, the carefully constructed facade of glamour and confidence, now all cracking at the seams, revealing the terrified, trapped young woman beneath. Another actress, she thought with a strange pang of recognition, realizing far too late that the glittering stage was, in fact, a carefully baited trap. "Come inside," Elara heard herself say, the words surprising even herself. "You look like you could use some tea. And frankly," she added, a touch of her old dry wit surfacing, "so do I." The tiny studio apartment felt even smaller, almost comically so, with the addition of Clara Monroe and her aura of Chanel No. 5 and barely suppressed panic. But Elara moved with a newfound, if weary, efficiency, filling the cheap electric kettle, pulling out 2 mismatched mugs, relics from a thrift store haul that now felt like treasures. She needed to keep her hands busy while her mind reeled, trying to process this latest, almost unbelievable turn of events. Clara stood awkwardly by the fold-out couch that served as Elara's bed, her gaze sweeping over the tiny, sparsely furnished space. It was a world away from the opulent penthouse she had undoubtedly shared with Julian. Her eyes, Elara noticed, landed on the small, slightly blurry NICU photo of Leo taped to the cracked mirror above the second-hand dresser. "Leo," Clara said softly, her voice barely a breath. "That's his name, isn't it? Julian, he never says it. Just calls him the baby when he's updating his lawyers on the situation." "He's not Julian's anymore," Elara replied, the words carrying a surprising weight of conviction, a truth that settled deep in her bones. "He's just mine. Leo Vance." The kettle clicked off, its cheerful whistle a jarring intrusion into the heavy silence. Elara poured hot water over 2 generic tea bags, the familiar mundane ritual a small anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. When she turned back, Clara had sunk onto the edge of the lumpy couch, the manila envelope lying open in her lap. Documents spilled out, contracts, financial statements from yet more hidden accounts, flight itineraries to exotic, secret destinations, even a few more candid, unflattering photos of Julian with women Elara didn't recognize. A meticulously documented paper trail of calculated cruelty, of systematic fraud that went far beyond just his personal betrayals. It painted a picture of a man who wasn't just a faithless husband, but a sophisticated, ruthless predator in all aspects of his life. "I thought I was special," Clara whispered, her voice hoarse as she touched a glossy photo of herself and Julian at some glittering, champagne-fueled event. She looked radiant, adored, blissfully ignorant. "I thought I was different. Different from you, from the others he mentioned, so casually." She shook her head, a self-deprecating, bitter little smile twisting her lips. "Such a stupid, stupid thing to think. How could I have been so naive?" "Not stupid," Elara said, handing her one of the steaming mugs. "The tea was probably terrible, but it was warm. Human. We all see what we need to see, Clara, what we want to believe, until we can't anymore. Until the truth slaps us so hard in the face, we have no choice but to open our eyes." Hadn't she done the exact same thing? For 6 long years? They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the clinking of their mugs and the distant wail of a city siren. Steam rose from their cups, carrying the faint, uninspiring scent of cheap tea. Sunlight, weak and watery, crept across the worn linoleum floorboards. 2 women who should have been sworn enemies, united by the same man's extraordinary capacity for carefully crafted destruction. What now? What did this bizarre, unexpected alliance even mean? "What will you do?" Elara asked finally, her voice gentle. Clara's hand trembled as she lifted her mug to her lips. I don't know," she confessed, her carefully constructed composure finally crumbling. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks, leaving mascara tracks in their wake. I can't do what he wants anymore. I can't be what he wants. But I don't know how to be anything else. He owns everything. The apartment, the car, even the clothes on my back, probably." She gestured vaguely at her expensive ensemble. "I have nothing. No one." "Yes, you do," Elara found herself saying, a surprising certainty in her voice. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts to find Dr. Evelyn Reed's number. "You just forgot for a while who you were before Julian Thorne. We all do sometimes when someone tries to rewrite our story for us." She pressed call, waiting as it rang, the sound unnaturally loud in the small room. "Dr. Reed? Evelyn? It's Elara Vance. Yes, I'm okay. Listen, I need a favor. A rather unusual one. There's someone here with me. Her name is Clara Monroe, and she needs to see you. Urgently." Later that afternoon, watching from the window of Leo's NICU room as Clara Monroe, looking even smaller and more vulnerable in a set of borrowed ill-fitting clothes, followed Dr. Evelyn Reed down the long hospital corridor towards the prenatal clinic, Elara felt something unexpected shift within her. Not forgiveness, not exactly. That seemed a bridge too far, at least for now. But understanding. A reluctant, complicated understanding. And a strange, almost unsettling sense of shared experience. Sometimes she was beginning to learn the path to your own healing wins through the most unexpected landscapes, through helping someone else find their way out of the same suffocating darkness you had only just begun to escape. Her phone buzzed. A text from Serafina. "Courthouse. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Julian's lawyers are trying to fast-track the property seizure. We need to file an emergency injunction. And Elara, where are those PI documents Evelyn found? We need every weapon in our arsenal. Elara looked down at the thick manila envelope Clara had left on her lumpy fold-out couch, now clutched tightly in her own hands. It felt heavy. Heavy with secrets, heavy with Julian Thorne's true, monstrous nature, and heavy perhaps with the first faint glimmer of justice. On my way, she typed back to Serafina. And Serafina? I think we just changed the game, significantly. Outside the NICU window, the afternoon sun, previously weak and watery, seemed to have broken through the port city smog, turning the city's grimy brick walls to a surprising, almost hopeful shade of gold. Another day of battles lay ahead. The courthouse, the NICU visits, the endless struggle to stay afloat. But for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, Elara Vance felt the ground beneath her feet begin to solidify. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. Something new. Something real. Something that even Julian Thorne, with all his money, all his power, all his carefully constructed lies, could not touch. That night, her recurring dream of the lighthouse shifted again. The storm still raged, the waves were still mountainous, but now, struggling in the churning water, illuminated by the lighthouse's unwavering beam, were two figures. Not just one. And the light seemed to be searching for them both. The polished marble of the Port City courthouse hallway gleamed under harsh, recessed lighting, a cold, indifferent witness to the anxieties of those who paced its echoing expanse. Elara Vance sat on a hard, unforgiving wooden bench, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Her second-hand suit, pressed as neatly as she could manage in her cramped studio apartment, felt like a flimsy shield against the impending legal storm. Across the hall, Julian Thorne's high-powered legal team huddled like a flock of expensive, agitated crows, their hushed whispers bouncing off the cold stone walls, sharp and urgent. Something was definitely off. Elara could feel it, a thrum of unease in the air that went beyond her own terror. "He's late," Serafina Reed observed quietly, her voice a low, steady hum beside Elara. Dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that seemed to radiate quiet authority, Serafina stood guard like an avenging angel carved from granite. Julian Thorne is never late. Not for something this performative. Not when he thinks he holds all the cards. Elara's stomach churned. Every tick of the enormous, ornate clock at the end of the hall felt like a hammer blow against her already frayed nerves. The documents Clara Monroe had provided, combined with what Evelyn had found in Julian's study, painted a picture of deceit so vast, so intricate, it was almost beyond comprehension. Serafina had been energized by the new evidence, her eyes gleaming with a chilling, predatory light. But would it be enough? Could they really fight a man like Julian, with his armies of lawyers, his bottomless pits of money, his ironclad control over everything and everyone? Or was this just another David and Goliath story, destined for a tragic, predictable end? She clutched the antique locket at her throat, its familiar coolness a small, insufficient comfort. Just as a bailiff began to call out case numbers, the massive, ornate doors at the far end of the hallway burst open. Elara's heart leaped into her throat. Julian, finally. But no. It wasn't his confident, arrogant stride that filled the doorway. Instead, a different figure appeared, hurrying towards them, still in pale blue hospital scrubs, her expression a mixture of urgency and something Elara couldn't quite decipher. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn? Serafina straightened instantly, her lawyerly composure momentarily displaced by sisterly concern. What is it? Is it Leo? Dr. Reed reached them, slightly breathless. He's asking for his mother, Elara, she said, her voice loud enough for Julian's hovering legal team to hear. Her gaze fixed on Elara, warm and direct. Leo, he's ready for his first real hold. Kangaroo care. The nurses say his vitals are stable enough. He needs you. The world stopped. The echoing hallway, the anxious lawyers, the stern-faced judge striding past, it all receded into a distant, irrelevant hum. Leo, her son, ready to be held, skin to skin. After weeks of watching him through the cold, sterile plastic walls of an incubator, of touching him only through tiny portholes, her fingers longing for the simple, profound weight of him against her heart. Today. Now. But the hearing, Elara whispered, her voice hoarse, her mind reeling, torn between two impossible, desperate needs. Her son, her freedom. Could she really just walk away? What would Julian's lawyers do? Your Honor. Serafina Reed's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the sudden hush. She'd already intercepted the passing judge, a formidable woman with a reputation for no-nonsense fairness. May I approach the bench? A matter of urgent maternal importance has arisen concerning my client, Mrs. Vance. The next few minutes passed in a surreal blur of hushed, intense conversation at the judge's bench. Elara caught snippets. Dr. Reed's precise medical explanation of kangaroo care, its critical importance for a preemie's development, the bonding, the regulation of heartbeat and temperature. Serafina's passionate, eloquent argument about inviolable maternal rights, about the psychological well-being of both mother and child. She saw Julian's lead attorney try to interject, to protest, but the judge silenced him with a single, imperious wave of her hand. Then, the judge looked directly at Elara, her gaze surprisingly kind, understanding. 2 hours, the judge declared, her voice resonating through the suddenly silent hallway. This court will reconvene at noon. Miss Vance, she nodded towards Elara, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Go meet your son. Elara barely registered the swift elevator ride back to Port City General, where the familiar, hurried walk through the antiseptic-smelling hospital corridors, Serafina and Evelyn flanking her like a protective honor guard. Her mind, her heart, her entire being was consumed with one thought: Leo. His tiny fingers, his improbable fighting spirit, the way he'd battled for every precious ounce, every fragile breath, while she'd watched and waited and prayed. The NICU doors whispered open. Nurse Hannah greeted them with a wide, knowing smile, already helping Elara into a sterile gown, her movements efficient and gentle. Someone's been a very patient little man, she said softly, her eyes twinkling as she led Elara towards Leo's incubator. And someone else, she added with a warm glance at Elara, deserves this more than anyone I know. And there he was, her son. Pinker now, his skin less translucent, his tiny features more defined. Still impossibly small, still wired to the blinking, beeping sentinels of modern medicine, but stronger, visibly stronger. 5 pounds, 8 precious ounces of pure, unadulterated miracle. No longer tinged with that terrifying blue, no longer struggling quite so desperately for every breath. He was perfect. Ready, Mom? Nurse Hannah asked, her voice a gentle caress. Elara could only nod, tears already pricking at her eyes, her throat tight with an emotion so profound, so overwhelming, it had no name. With practiced, infinitely tender care, Nurse Hannah lifted Leo from his clear plastic palace, deftly managing the tangle of tubes and monitors with an expertise that still amazed Elara. And then he was there, against her chest, his tiny, warm, impossibly fragile body nestled against her skin for the very first time since his traumatic birth. His downy head smelling faintly of baby powder and something uniquely, wonderfully Leo, tucked just under her chin. His minuscule heart, she could feel it, beating a steady, surprisingly strong rhythm against her own. Real, solid, here, home. Hi, baby, she whispered, the tears finally falling, hot and unrestrained, tracing pathways down her cheeks, dripping onto Leo's soft hair. Hi, my brave, beautiful boy. Mommy's here. Oh, Leo, Mommy's finally truly here. He squirmed slightly, a tiny, protesting wiggle, then settled with a sigh so deep, so contented, Elara felt it resonate in the very marrow of her bones. The monitors above them, she noticed dimly, showed his heart rate steadying even further, his oxygen saturation levels actually rising, just from being held, just from being home against her heart. The power of it, the simple, staggering power of a mother's embrace. Could anything in the world be more real, more vital than this? Elara. Dr. Reed's voice, cutting through the sacred luminous bubble of the moment, urgent, yet gentle. There's something else, something you need to see. Now. Reluctantly, Elara lifted her tear-filled eyes, still cradling Leo protectively, unwilling to break the spell. Dr. Reed held out her phone, her expression a strange mixture of grim satisfaction and something akin to triumph. Displayed on the screen was a breaking news alert from the Port City Chronicle's website, the headline blazing in stark, bold letters that made Elara's breath catch in her throat. Breaking. Port City real estate mogul Julian Thorne arrested on multiple fraud charges. Federal investigation underway. Arrested? Julian? Elara stared at the screen, the words blurring, refusing to make sense. How? The evidence Clara Monroe provided, Dr. Reed explained quietly, her voice low but carrying a distinct note of victory. And the documents I found in Julian's study. Serafina didn't just find proof of his personal deceptions, Elara. She uncovered years of systematic financial fraud, investment scams, money laundering through those offshore accounts, shell corporations. It turns out your husband wasn't just a cruel, faithless man. He was a world-class con artist. The offshore accounts weren't just for hiding money from you, Elara. They were for hiding money from, well, from everyone, including the federal government. The implications, vast and terrifying, crashed over Elara like a tidal wave. The canceled insurance, the transferred properties, the emptied bank accounts. He hadn't just been preparing to leave her, to discard her like one of his expensive, quickly tiring of toys. He'd been preparing for his entire house of cards to collapse. And he'd intended for her to be buried under the rubble. He'd planned to leave her destitute, discredited, perhaps even implicated. The sheer, diabolical cunning of it. The depth of his malice. Her own phone, tucked into the pocket of the hospital gown, buzzed insistently. It was a text from Serafina. Short, terse, and utterly, gloriously triumphant. Courthouse hearing canceled indefinitely. Judge granting emergency ex parte ruling in your favor. Full custody of Leo, temporary full spousal and child support. All Thorne assets frozen pending investigation. He can't fight it from a federal holding cell, Elara. We got him. We well and truly got the bastard. Elara's gaze dropped back to the tiny, sleeping miracle nestled against her chest. Leo, her son. A future. A future that, just moments ago, had seemed impossibly bleak, now stretched before her, uncertain, yes, but also hopeful. A profound, overwhelming sense of peace, of victory washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. They had done it. She had done it. For Leo. Julian Thorne's carefully constructed empire, built on lies and deceit, and the casual cruelty he inflicted on anyone he deemed disposable, was crumbling to dust. Somewhere across town, in the cold, sterile confines of a federal holding cell, he was facing his own reckoning. His reign of terror was over. She looked up at Dr. Evelyn Reed, her heart overflowing with a gratitude too profound for words. "Evelyn," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "can you do me one more favor? Can you call the community clinic for me? The one down on Miller Street? Tell Maria. Tell her I'll be there for my shift tonight. Tell her I'll be a little late, but I'll be there." "Elara, you don't have to," Evelyn began, concern etched on her face. "You need to rest. You need to be with Leo." "I want to," Elara said, a small, determined smile touching her lips as she felt Leo's steady, even breaths against her skin. "There are other mothers out there, Evelyn. Other women walking in at midnight with sick babies and scared, empty hearts. They need someone who understands. Someone who can show them, maybe, just how to be strong, how to fight." She thought of Julian's penthouse, of the conservatory filled with his prized exotic black orchids, each one a testament to his obsession with control, with perfect, unnatural beauty. She pictured them now, those rare, delicate blooms, untended, unwatered, their velvety black petals already beginning to droop, to wither, to turn to dust, mirroring the fate of their meticulous, monstrous master. The image brought a surprising, almost savage satisfaction. The locket at her throat felt warm, almost alive, against her skin. Through the large NICU windows, the late afternoon Port City sun painted the sprawling skyline in breathtaking shades of reclaimed gold and unexpected promise. Somewhere in that vast, indifferent city, Julian Thorne was facing the truth of his own carefully constructed lies. Somewhere, Clara Monroe was embarking on her own terrifying, uncertain journey of rebuilding. But here, in this quiet, sacred room, surrounded by the gentle beeping of monitors and the tireless dedication of angel nurses, Elara Vance held everything that truly mattered. Everything real, everything pure. "You did it, little warrior," she whispered again to the sleeping infant in her arms, pressing a soft kiss to his downy head. "You showed me how to fight. You showed me how to win." She looked down at him, her heart swelling with a love so fierce, so protective, it was a physical force. "Now, my sweet Leo," she murmured, her voice filled with a newfound, unshakable resolve, "let's go show the world how to live." Holding Leo, the scent of his baby skin a balm to her soul, Elara knew this wasn't just an ending, but a fierce, beautiful, and utterly terrifying beginning. Julian's reign was over. Her own, and Leo's, was just starting. From ashes to dawn, a new life, a stronger love. The day Leo was finally released from the NICU, Port City seemed to hold its breath. then exhale in a symphony of crisp, golden autumn light. Or maybe, Elara Vance mused, it was just her own heart, finally daring to hope, that painted the familiar, gritty cityscape in such uncharacteristically warm and celebratory hues. After weeks that had stretched into an eternity, weeks of beeping monitors and whispered anxieties, of watching her tiny son battle for every precious breath through the sterile confines of an incubator, he was coming home. Home. The word itself felt like a miracle. "Welcome home, warrior," Elara whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears as she gently carried Leo, swaddled like a precious fragile jewel, across the threshold of their tiny studio apartment. It wasn't the sprawling, sun-drenched nursery she'd once meticulously planned in Julian Thorne's opulent penthouse, with its hand-painted murals of whimsical clouds and its ridiculously expensive imported crib. No. This was a single, small room, sparsely furnished with second-hand treasures and an outpouring of donated baby supplies from the nurses at Port City General and her newfound, fiercely protective circle of friends. The fold-out couch, her own bed, had been pushed against one wall to make room for a sturdy, slightly battered crib that Dr. Evelyn Reed had unearthed from a charity shop. It was simple, it was humble, and to Elara, it was more beautiful, more perfect than any palace. Because this tiny space, this sanctuary carved out of the wreckage of her former life, was filled with something Julian's millions could never buy. Honest work, genuine love, and the unwavering support of a true community. Nurse Hannah, Leo's favorite NICU nurse, arrived a little later for the official home health evaluation. Her presence was a comforting, familiar reassurance in the terrifying newness of it all. "Well, look at you, little man," she cooed, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she expertly checked Leo's vitals, her touch gentle and sure. "Already king of the castle, are we?" Elara smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her tired eyes. "He certainly seems to think so." Leo, nestled in her arms, gurgled contentedly, his honey-colored eyes, so like her own, bright and surprisingly alert. No more tubes snaking from his tiny nose, no more monitors relentlessly charting his fragile existence. Just her son, finally, here, safe. "And you, Elara?" Nurse Hannah asked, her gaze turning to Elara, kind but perceptive. "How are you really doing? You know you don't have to do this all alone. There are programs, support groups for new mothers, especially those who've been through, well, who've had a tough start." "I'm not alone, Hannah," Elara said, and the truth of those words resonated deep within her soul, a warm, steadying glow. Her gaze drifted around the small apartment. On the tiny, chipped Formica kitchen counter sat a hand-drawn card from Maria, the warm-hearted, no-nonsense charge nurse from the community clinic where Elara now worked the night shift as a receptionist, her nursing license finally, blessedly, reinstated last week. The card was an open invitation to Sunday dinner with Maria's boisterous, loving family. Real food, chica, not that hospital cafeteria stuff. Beside it lay a meticulously organized schedule of volunteer shift coverage for Elara's first few weeks at home with Leo, compiled by her clinic colleagues, each one offering to pick up extra hours to help in any way they could. And pinned to the corkboard above her tiny desk, amidst a flurry of NICU discharge instructions and appointment reminders, was a slightly blurry selfie. Elara, a tentative smile on her face, flanked by Dr. Evelyn Reed and, surprisingly, Clara Monroe, taken at Clara's latest prenatal checkup. 3 women, their lives irrevocably altered and unexpectedly intertwined by Julian Thorne's betrayals, now bound by a fragile, nascent thread of shared experience and an unspoken, cautious understanding. Who would have ever thought? The news of Julian's arrest, followed swiftly by his indictment on a dizzying array of federal fraud charges, had sent shockwaves through Port City's elite social circles. His carefully crafted empire, built on smoke and mirrors and other people's money, was crumbling with spectacular speed. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with an iron fist and a silken tongue now sat in a federal holding cell, his expensive custom-tailored suits, presumably exchanged for standard-issue prison orange. Serafina Reed, relentless and brilliant, was ensuring his assets remained frozen, a complex legal battle still unfolding, but one Elara now felt strangely detached from. Julian Thorne, the architect of her ruin, the ghost at her feast, was becoming a distant echo, a fading headline. Her world, once so suffocatingly defined by him, had narrowed, sharpened, and refocused on things that truly mattered. Leo's first full bottle, the proud, official-looking document confirming her renewed nursing license, now framed and hanging above her desk. The quiet camaraderie, the shared coffee and exhausted laughter with the growing family of midnight warriors at the community clinic. These were the new cornerstones of her existence. Just as Nurse Hannah was finishing her checklist, safety outlets covered, emergency numbers clearly posted, Leo's tiny bassinet free of potential hazards, the apartment door creaked open, and Maria bustled in, her arms laden with a fragrant, steaming casserole dish. Following close behind were Evelyn, and to Elara's quiet surprise, Serafina, looking slightly out of place but determinedly present, clutching a beautifully wrapped, if somewhat awkwardly chosen, giant plush giraffe. "Thought you two might need some real sustenance," Maria announced, her voice booming cheerfully in the small space. "And a few extra pairs of hands. This little hombrecito," she winked, nodding at Leo, now sleeping peacefully in Elara's arms, "is going to keep you busy, Mama." Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes soft as she gazed at Leo, then at Elara. She held out a small, elegantly simple silver picture frame. "The NICU nurses, the entire staff actually, wanted you to have this, Elara. A little something to remember how far you've both come." Tears pricked at Elara's eyes again as she took the frame. Inside was a photograph, taken in the stark, unforgiving light of the operating room, just moments after Leo's birth. Elara, pale and unconscious on the table. And Dr. Evelyn Reed, her face a mask of fierce determination, holding a tiny, terrifyingly blue baby in her gloved hands, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that spoke of an almost primal protectiveness. Below the photo, engraved in a flowing, elegant script, were just 5 words: "The moment strength was born." These tears, Elara realized with a sudden profound clarity, were different from the broken, despairing tears she had shed for so long. These were tears of gratitude, of being seen, of being known, of being valued not for some superficial, carefully constructed image, but for exactly who she was, scars and all. "And I have something for him too," Maria said softly, her usual boisterousness subdued as she pulled a small, slightly worn package from her oversized tote bag. Inside was a children's book, its cover faded and softened with years of love and countless readings. "Starlight Bear," the title read, above a charming illustration of a little bear gazing up at a sky full of impossibly bright stars. "For all the nights ahead, Mija," Maria explained, her voice warm, her eyes shining, "so he'll always remember where he comes from, what he's made of, and that even in the darkest night, there's always a light to guide him." Elara looked around her tiny apartment, at the donated diapers stacked neatly in a corner, the second-hand rocking chair Evelyn had found and painstakingly repainted, the slightly lopsided but undoubtedly love-filled mobile Serafina had awkwardly constructed from origami animals hanging above Leo's crib. No crystal chandeliers or polished marble floors. No designer labels or society photographs. Instead, there were night shift schedules taped to the refrigerator, well-thumbed nursing textbooks piled on the floor, bus passes tucked into her wallet, and a meticulously kept budget planner on her desk. And everywhere, in every corner, in every mismatched cup and lovingly darned baby blanket, was love. Love that had been tested, love that had been broken, and love that had been, against all odds, rebuilt. Stronger, truer, more resilient than anything Julian Thorne in his cold, empty world of power and possession could ever comprehend. Leo cooed softly in his sleep, his tiny hand impossibly small, gripping her finger with a surprising, determined strength. Through the single, grimy window of their studio, Port City's morning light, no longer bruised or apologetic, now painted their small world in vibrant, hopeful shades of infinite possibility. Later that evening, after her friends had reluctantly departed, leaving behind a comforting aroma of Maria's chicken casserole and an apartment overflowing with warmth and goodwill, Elara sat in the dim light, gently rocking a finally sleeping Leo. Her fingers traced the outline of the antique locket at her throat. She'd worn it for as long as she could remember, a silent, enigmatic companion through all the chapters of her life. Julian had always dismissed it as a trinket, urging her to replace it with something more appropriate, something more expensive, something he had chosen. But she never had. Now, with Leo sleeping soundly against her shoulder, his soft breaths a gentle rhythm against her skin, she carefully unclasped the locket. She'd never shown its contents to anyone, not even Julian. It was too private, too precious. With a tiny click, it sprang open. Nestled inside, behind a faded, protective piece of celluloid, was a miniature sepia-toned photograph of a woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle, resilient smile. Her mother. Gone too soon, lost to an illness that had ravaged her body but never touched her spirit. A woman who had faced her own struggles, her own heartbreaks, with a quiet, unyielding strength that Elara was only now, finally, beginning to understand. "She taught me about a different kind of strength, Leo," Elara whispered softly to her sleeping son, her voice thick with emotion as she gazed at the faded image. "Not the loud, arrogant kind your father mistakes for power, but the quiet kind, the kind that endures, the kind that bends but never breaks, the kind that finds light in the deepest darkness." And as she spoke, the image of the lighthouse from her dreams surfaced in her mind, clearer now, more sharply defined than ever before. The storm still raged around it, the waves still crashed with terrifying force, but the lighthouse itself stood tall, unwavering, its powerful beam cutting a resolute path through the tempest. And she, Elara, was no longer a desperate figure struggling in the churning water. She was the keeper of that light, tending its flame, ensuring its beam reached out, a beacon of hope and guidance for others lost in their own storms. This, she knew with a sudden, profound certainty that settled deep in her soul. This was her path, her purpose. Forged in the ashes of betrayal, illuminated by the fierce, unconditional love for her son. "What do you think, little warrior?" she murmured, pressing a kiss to Leo's downy head as the first true smile, a radiant, breathtaking sunrise of a smile spread across his tiny, sleeping face. And in that smile, in that moment of perfect, unadulterated peace, Elara Vance saw everything. Their past transformed into hard-won wisdom, their present filled with an unexpected, almost overwhelming sense of purpose, and their future. Their future, she knew with every fiber of her being, was finally, truly theirs to write, one honest, courageous page at a time. The journey had been brutal, almost unbearable at times, but the destination she was beginning to see might just be breathtaking. 1 year later. A single year. 12 months that had somehow managed to contain both an eternity of pain and a lifetime of healing. The community clinic's waiting room, usually a symphony of midnight emergencies and hushed, anxious whispers, buzzed with a different kind of energy at sunrise. Gone was the frantic fear. In its place, a warm golden light streamed through the newly cleaned windows, illuminating walls now cheerfully decorated with children's colorful, hopeful drawings. A small, slightly battered play corner, overflowing with worn toys and dog-eared picture books, occupied one end of the room. And on the wall, a new, neatly lettered sign read, "The Nightlight Sisters, Mother's Support and Resource Group. Every Thursday, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Coffee, courage, and community." Elara Vance, her crisp nurse's badge gleaming, adjusted the simple silver necklace at her throat. A recent, treasured gift from her clinic family, engraved with the words, "Strength grows where you pour love." No longer just a receptionist filling in, she was a fully reinstated RN, a valued member of the overnight shift team, a shift she'd chosen, surprisingly to some, to keep. There was a unique solidarity in those quiet, pre-dawn hours, a rawness and honesty that she'd come to cherish. Leo, now a sturdy, determined 14-month-old, with his mother's bright, intelligent eyes and an unstoppable curiosity, played contentedly in a portable playpen set up near her charting station. He was stacking colorful blocks with fierce concentration, occasionally letting out a triumphant babble. "Mama work?" he'd asked earlier, his favorite new question, tugging at her uniform as she'd prepared for the day. "Yes, baby," she'd scooped him up, breathing in his sweet, milky morning scent, a scent that never failed to anchor her. "Mama works to help other mamas be strong, just like you helped me be strong." It was the truest thing she knew. "Look who's here for breakfast." Maria's booming, cheerful voice carried from the clinic entrance. She was ushering in their familiar, beloved group. Dr. Evelyn Reed, an insulated travel mug of what was undoubtedly excellent coffee in each hand. And Clara Monroe, her own baby girl, little Lily, sleeping peacefully in a soft sling against her chest. Several other mothers, Women Elara had met in the darkest hours of their own lives, women she'd sat with, cried with, and helped guide through their own terrifying storms, trailed in behind them, their faces tired but smiling. This had become their tradition, their lifeline. Sharing morning meals after exhausting night shifts, watching their children, the sunrise babies, Evelyn called them, play together, building a vibrant, resilient community from the shattered pieces of their once broken dreams. They called themselves the Nightlight Sisters. It had started as a joke, a wry comment from Maria about their shared nocturnal schedules, but it had somehow stuck. It had become everything, a testament to the incredible, often underestimated power of shared experience and unwavering female solidarity. Who needed a formal support group when you had this? "Ready for your big speech tonight, Elara?" Dr. Reed asked, handing her one of the coffees. The aroma alone was enough to revive her. Elara nodded, a nervous flutter in her stomach as she touched the acceptance letter tucked into her pocket. Port City University's prestigious nursing program had offered her a part-time teaching position, a chance to share her hard-won NICU experience, her insights on trauma-informed care with a new generation of nurses. Her first lecture, scheduled for that very evening, was titled, rather ambitiously she thought, "Beyond Survival, Rebuilding Through Service." "I think so," she said, her gaze drifting to Leo, who was now attempting, with a determined frown, to fit a square block into a round hole. "A perfect metaphor for life sometimes. I'm just going to tell them about strength. Real strength. The kind that lifts others even when you're barely standing yourself?" Clara Monroe asked softly, her voice now carrying a quiet confidence that Elara would never have associated with the terrified, broken woman who had appeared on her doorstep a year ago. Clara's own journey from Julian Thorne's gilded cage to single motherhood had been transformative. From the woman who had, however inadvertently, played a role in shattering Elara's world, she had emerged as a fierce advocate, now running a surprisingly successful online support network for women escaping toxic relationships, turning her once superficial social media influence into a genuine force for healing and empowerment. It was, Elara often thought, one of the most unexpected and profoundly beautiful ironies of her new life. Exactly that kind of strength, Elara smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. She remembered those countless exhausting nights in this very room, now so bright and hopeful in the morning sun. Mothers holding each other's babies while one filled out a job application online. Nurses, during rare lulls between emergencies, teaching a young, overwhelmed single mom how to create a budget. Dr. Reed, somehow always managing to arrange for essential medical care, for prescriptions, for specialist appointments that magically fit within the clinic's often strained sliding scale fees. Miracles, small and large, happened here every single day. The morning sun, now fully risen, caught the delicate silver of her new necklace, making it sparkle. But beneath it, a constant, familiar presence, lay the antique locket her mother had given her. Two symbols intertwined. The strength inherited from the woman who had taught her quiet endurance, and the strength forged in the fires of betrayal and then gifted anew by this extraordinary community of women. Her chosen family. Elara thought about her upcoming lecture. What would she tell those eager, bright-eyed nursing students? She'd tell them that sometimes the worst, most unimaginable betrayals can, in the strangest of ways, lead us to our truest, most profound purpose. That real strength isn't about never breaking, but about how you meticulously, painfully, and courageously put yourself back together, piece by broken piece. That true power isn't found in penthouse apartments or offshore bank accounts or the ability to control and manipulate others, but in the quiet dignity of a midnight cup of coffee shared with someone who truly understands your struggle, who sees your scars and doesn't flinch. That real love, the kind that endures, the kind that matters, doesn't trap you in golden cages, no matter how beautiful they might seem. It gives you wings. It teaches you to fly. And most importantly, she would tell them, every single woman carries within her the extraordinary, unquenchable power to rewrite her own story. One brave, defiant, and ultimately triumphant choice at a time. The lighthouse from her dreams. It was so clear to her now. It wasn't just a symbol of guidance for her anymore. She was the lighthouse keeper. Her experiences, her pain, her hard-won healing, they were the fuel for its unwavering beam, a light to guide other women, other mothers, other lost souls through their own raging storms. Julian Thorne? He was a forgotten headline, a footnote in a cautionary tale about greed and hubris, currently serving a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary, his vast, ill-gotten empire dismantled, his name now synonymous with disgrace. His prized black orchids, Elara had heard through the Port City grapevine, had withered and died within weeks of his arrest, their unnatural beauty unable to survive without his constant, obsessive control. Good riddance. Leo pulled himself up on her legs then, his small hands gripping her scrubs, those bright, honey-colored eyes, so like her own, now filled with a familiar, impish mischief. "Mama work?" he asked again, his favorite question, his voice a sweet, melodic babble. "Yes, baby," Elara scooped him up, burying her face in his soft, fragrant curls, breathing in the pure, uncomplicated scent of his sweet morning breath. Her true wealth, her anchor, her reason. "Mama works to help other mamas be strong, just like you helped me, my little lion, just like you taught me how to be strong." Through the clinic windows, Port City was waking up, stretching and yawning, preparing for another day. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, other women were facing their own battles, their own betrayals, their own impossible odds. But here, in this small, sun-drenched room, surrounded by the comforting aroma of coffee and courage, of love and laughter, of second chances and unbreakable sister hearts, Elara Vance knew, with a certainty that resonated to the very core of her being, that they were no longer alone. They were already home. She held Leo close, rocking him gently, her gaze meeting the warm, smiling eyes of Evelyn, of Maria, of Clara, of all the other warriors gathered around her. "Let me tell you the best story I know, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, carrying the quiet strength of a lighthouse beam cutting through the deepest night. "It's about a baby boy, a tiny, fierce warrior, who taught his mama how to fight, how to heal, how to love again. And it's about the angels, disguised as ordinary women, who helped them find their way home."